Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast, brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey, your host and president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share what our clients and partners do daily to make a difference in the world. And this season's theme is all about change. Today, we're talking about a topic that's at the core of how government agencies operate, procurement. And it's especially fitting because March is Procurement Month, and we're here at the NASPO Exchange in Las Vegas with our partners from Civic Initiatives. I'm going to take a moment to welcome our guest, Dustin Lanier, the founder and principal consultant at Civic Initiatives. Thanks so much for being here today, Dustin.
I'm excited to be here.
Let's start by just getting to know you a little bit more. Can you tell us a bit about your professional background and how you came to work in public procurement?
Sure. Well, my overall resume was a blend of politics and technology. And then I had the opportunity to bring those two threads together with a job in the governor's office, where I was the governor's special assistant for technology policy. And then I held a couple of other roles in state government involved in technology. I was the deputy state CIO, and then I ran a specialized procurement shop called the Council on Competitive Government. I came to love procurement. I think there's a lot of opportunity in procurement. And if you like change in government, then you need to like procurement, because that's where a lot of the actual rubber meets the road on the way that things work. So I'm a certified public procurement officer and came to procurement late in my career, but I'm happy that I found it.
Great. Thank you. On a personal note, are there any principles or values that you'd like to share on how you approach change in your life, both personally and professionally?
So at one point in my career, when I was in the technology office, I had to communicate a lot of change in a data center situation. And I had a particular method I used where I would talk about both what is important about the current state that needs to be retained, and then what are some of the risks about the future state that we're going to move into, as a way to acknowledge that change is hard and there are changes not automatically always a great thing. It has to be taken with care, and we have to respect what people are doing and in some cases what they've spent their lives on. So if you can start with acknowledging that there are risks in where we're going and there's things that have to be retained in what is good today, then you can get people to listen to, well, what is not working about today that requires us to take an action, and what is the opportunity at the backside of the change if we work together to execute it. So in general, I think coming with respect to people who maybe are going to have to absorb something that's different and building a case with them as an equal partner, I think is the most effective way to drive success when you're dealing with change.
Yeah, and so important with procurement. I think of, system procurements that we've done where people are very tied to the way that they do things and the way that the system operates today, and trying to get them to think about what the future might look like or what a new system might look like is painful sometimes. And we all come at change differently, right? And at different times too. So some may be very excited about it while others are very fearful. We're here today to talk a little bit more about NASPO Value Point, and more specifically about the PASS portfolio, which both of us have been providing services under for the last 5 years or so, and helping agencies, right, government agencies, meet challenges head on by streamlining their access to procurement support. And so for those that are unfamiliar with NASPO PASS, would you mind giving a brief overview of what it is and who it serves?
Sure. So it was originally the Procurement of Acquisition Support Services. The name changed slightly in the new version, but they kept the same acronym. So it is an opportunity for people to receive help in the procurement shop for their ability to execute. And to me, if there's any one contract category that should be available through a cooperative contract, it is PASS, because if the procurement shop is in such a state of need or transition that they need external help, they need access to that rapidly and with trusted partners who actually know what they're doing. So the PASS contract covers 14 some odd different categories related to acquisition, with the first 10 or 11 having primarily to do with the actions that you take when you're doing a sourcing event, such as market research, procurement execution, evaluation, independent government cost estimate. And then there's also, historically, there are categories for policy development, category management, a couple of different smaller areas. In the new version of the contract, it's more robust on articulating those, as well as allowing for other areas that may have been implied in the past contract but weren't explicitly stated, such as grant management. So it's a really robust tool for procurement shops to be able to extend their office in a variety of ways that help them be more effective in serving their departments and therefore, by extension, citizens.
Can you share some examples of ways that you've helped agencies kind of streamline those procurement processes or other work that you've done under NASPO PASS?
I sometimes describe it as blue collar and white collar. On the blue collar side, just literally helping to execute sourcing work. We've had situations where people were short individuals and they needed more actual direct help. There's a capacity issue. And then there's also a competency issue in the terms of I may have the people, but they haven't done a contract manager at risk solicitation or an IT solicitation. So there can be both a need on the quote unquote blue collar side to simply execute the day-to-day logistics and block and tackling of the procurement shop. And that's work that we've done in myriad ways, either single instances or helping over a period of time. We helped a major university when they needed to stand up a team that they didn't have yet. We were the team for a period of time. We helped them to actually interview people to end up filling the team and then help mentor that team once they were done. So that's a lot of the execution work. There's also a lot of work around how do you make procurement be a strategic asset, because it's easy for procurement to become dominated by the purchasing function and handling the logistics of the work. And then all of the activities we need to make procurement be a more strategic asset can sometimes take a back seat just because it's not hair on fire. Nobody's screaming for a new procurement manual or a new RFP template. And so sometimes there's projects where you need more thoughtful execution and you need somebody who's actually responsible for completing it. So delayering of the governance process, helping the executives understand why procurement is an important function and why we need it to actually be able to move through processes we've built in the past that made it hard to do procurement. Spend analysis, contract management, helping with any of the many programs that procurement is supposed to stand up, like green and recycling and set-asides, et cetera, as well as a variety of procurement automation planning and prep projects. All of those are available and have been done under the PASS contract in the past.
Yeah, I love talking to you and your team about ways that you guys use NASPO, because there's some overlap and then there's a lot of differences too. Because often when we're involved, we're helping a health or human service agency with usually a pretty large and complex procurement, right? Like a large system effort that, it takes a lot of that kind of subject matter expertise to understand, and there's not a lot of them done. And maybe the state does one once every 10 years. So no one that works there was involved the last time around. And so we're brought in to kind of help with that. But the more complicated thing around like the process and the governance and the who does what, right, is often a barrier that we can encounter as we're doing that. It's been kind of an aha moment for me and probably you as well, Dustin, right, as we work together to figure out like that partnership and understanding those barriers from both sides, I think is going to be a really strong place as we move forward, because it's a good complement one to the other.
Absolutely. And in addition to the fact that we genuinely like your team and your team genuinely likes our team, I think that it is what I found compelling about learning about you guys and trying to find the synergies is you guys have tended to come from the program towards the center procurement office, and we've historically always come from the center procurement office towards the program. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together and to leverage each other's strengths. But specifically in terms of serving that center procurement office, whether it is at a state level or a one-person shop in a small county, all of our folks that interact all came out of public procurement. It's a core part of our DNA that our IT support is a former procurement person. Our office manager is a former procurement person. Everyone who's a forward-facing consultant is a procurement person. Almost all of them are certified. And so, while we strive to be 100% perfect at all times in all the work that we do, the ability to overcome even small bumps or changes or making sure that you can be trusted comes from the fact that we've done that work and we inherently respect that work. And so it's a deep part of who we are is serving that procurement community and learning how to understand their issues and anticipate their needs.
Yeah, it's great. And I think our team has come to procurement from very different places, right? Like myself as a lawyer and working in state government and doing procurement myself, that's a backdoor way into procurement, as well as some of our systems team members who came at it because of understanding how to procure and write requirements for IT systems. We just have very different ways of coming to that procurement, which I think is a good complement. All right. So procurement obviously is more than just purchasing, right? It's about making kind of those strategic decisions that can impact whoever that agency is serving or whoever they're working with or the communities that they're in. How do you see procurement support helping agencies make better decisions for the people that they serve?
I'll answer that. I'll actually speak briefly to your preamble there about procurement and purchasing. So I actually talk about that a lot. So to me, purchasing is the activity of ensuring that moment of compliance, that moment of connecting the dots between the process and the procedure. There is absolute honor in purchasing. As I complete this sentence, I'm not making a negative comment on purchasing, but purchasing tends to get isolated into being a clerking type function from the perspective of leadership. So we always say that procurement is the entire holistic activity that surrounds the purchasing function and elevates it into being a strategic asset for these entities. And we want to bring procurement forward as a strategic asset. We want to help to elevate that because procurement is able to serve the departments by being able to say, well, what problem are you seeking to solve? Not just what did you put down on the paper in the RFP that you perceive. What problem are we trying to solve? And what is the way to go to market in order to create that opportunity? Am I procuring something that has been procured many times? And so I'm trying to drive a few terms that have evaded me and drive a best price and a best outcome from a risk perspective? Am I trying to create a market, which means I have to be able to be a little bit more entrepreneurial in how I put it to market, being willing to have the potential for failure in a sourcing event because I'm trying to create something new? A lot of people who've been in procurement saying the words being willing to accept a small amount of risk of failure does not resonate the first time that you say it because they've always been told, lock it in 100% of the time. But if we're really dealing with our business partners to say, what is the right combination of approach and vendors that is going to get us to the outcome that we have vendors who are aligned to the problem that we're trying to solve? They're not working against us by the way that we created it. There is a huge amount of game theory and amount of design that comes into procurement if they have the opportunity and the space to actually be in that role. So your question was about how does procurement support departments in delivering on this? It's a combination of making sure that those parts of our organization that are more commoditized and more part of our core supply chain, that we're locking those down in a certain way. But we're also able to say, how is the way that we are driving this event going to maximize the outcomes of the departments? One of the things I've always said about that job that I had in government where I was doing procurement, that if you like changing government, then you should love procurement because you never have more opportunity to change things when you have money in one hand and requirements in the other. But we've never taught the procurement people to think that way if they were not empowered by a strategic leader in the past. So really understanding that procurement is the expression of the program and the ability to come to market to seek business partners that want to be aligned with our goals is one of the highest expressions of the opportunity in procurement.
As opposed to what I think I've seen often, which is compliance and risk mitigation. And those are such different roles, right? And again, there is a place for that in commodities and low risk, right? Like things that you purchase all the time. But if you are looking at something that you're trying to change or do something different, that type of innovation and creativity and thoughtfulness at the beginning and that kind of visioning work and thinking about the market is so important.
Well, it's a combination of having people in the procurement roles who can see and act that way. And then if they haven't been given the opportunity in the past, to help them learn how to have that skill. Because if all you were allowed to do was be in a box this big for an amount of time, then how do you know to even be able to suggest to business that maybe we go this way or maybe we go that way? I talk a lot about compliant, and compliance is not a solution in and of itself. You can be compliant and have a terrible sourcing event. You can be compliant and have no vendors respond to your solicitation. You can be compliant and set up a transaction model that's going to eat all of the money before the project's even done. So compliant cannot be the end goal. It has to be compliant and. I talk about compliance and innovation. I also think compliant and being a modern business partner is a really important concept because there is no procurement without vendors. So understanding what it takes for the vendors to be able to be successful and being able to create a situation where you have at least 2 vendors at the end of the game who are capable of delivering the service so that you can fulfill your responsibility. If you get to the end of a sourcing event that is fully compliant and you only have 1 vendor that you're negotiating with, you have not served the goals. So it's very important to drive an activity that has those characteristics. I'll also segue for just a second into a story I talk a lot about in this space, which is don't cover the stove in caution tape. And what do I mean by that? So if procurement is the stove, and if at some point in the process, somebody burned their hand on the stove, and then the people who are in charge of the stove say, I'm really scared of that stove. Nobody use it again. Cover it in caution tape. Let's make it really hard to use the stove. But we need the stove to cook. We need the stove to do things. So we don't need to cover the stove in caution tape. We need to teach people how to use the stove. And I think that's one of the biggest things that happens in procurement, that for the kind of program work, Stacey, that you're dealing with, where people are trying to be innovative, but we've wrapped ourselves into these boxes where it's so challenging to do a sourcing event because we're so afraid of the sourcing event. But if we say a sourcing event is the opportunity to express our policy goals and find a partner who will help us to develop and engage them, then what is the event that will cause that solution and drive to that? Is it presenting a problem-based sourcing event where we state the problem and we allow vendor space to come in and to be able to suggest different types of responses to that? That's pretty out of the box, and yet it's done. And so really saying, what is the problem that's going to solve this particular situation is, I think, so important.
Yeah, and I think that those competing priorities between that innovation or a different way of doing things and compliance, I think that is where we've seen agencies trying, and usually because we're pushing the agencies, hey, try this, right? Like if you don't think there's going to be any competition, then let's have a vendor fair. If you don't know exactly what the solution is, then we've done things like what you've talked about, Dustin, like either give them just the problem or just the outcomes, right? Rather than detailed requirements. Another one that we have challenges around is if you know and the pricing is pretty clear, then just publish the budget, right? And then you take price off the table. When we're kind of trying to push agencies to be a little bit more innovative to deal with some of their challenges, they will go back to central procurement to try to get it approved, and they get the red flag, hey, we don't do that. That's not in the regs, or that's not in our rules. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is how do you, and again, we're not telling them do this for every sourcing event or every procurement, but when it's necessary and when it needs to be used and when you need to try a different tool or be more innovative, how do you balance that with a compliance, right? And with a central procurement agency that is kind of dealing with a lot and trying to keep the road moving in a very similar fashion for all the agencies.
Well, some of the ability to think that way comes from having had leadership or a vision that emphasizes the outcome as opposed to the compliance event. And sometimes if you've only ever had one way to do things, it's hard to consider alternative ways to doing things. The old cliche that if your only tool is a hammer, then the whole world's a nail, right? If you've only ever done big, long 600-page RFPs, then that's the only tool in the toolbox. Being able to say, what solves the problem and how do we maximize the time that we can spend on the problem for things that are unique to that situation? So helping procurement to have time to create more tools in the toolkit and an awareness that there are more tools in the toolkit, so that then when they're dealing with their business customers, they're able to first understand what are we solving before they reach in the toolbox to pull out the tool to solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about some key procurement trends. What are you seeing right now and kind of what's pushing this market in a different direction?
Contracts has been a longstanding thing that's gotten a lot of attention. I'm actually anticipating I'm going to speak at GFOA in a panel on cooperative contracts. It's a great example how if it's used in an inefficient way, it can be against the goals, but if it's used efficiently, it can create space. So being able to say, out of categories that I have, where should I spend the most time and where should I do the most work? And then cooperative contracts are a good way to say, I could solve that problem, but if I solve that problem, that's time I can't use to spend this other problem. So what should I spend the most time on? So I think the contracts and the strategy that's associated with category management review, I think is important. And then being able to say, well, I like that contract, but I've lost all my local customers. Well, take that contract and issue it for yourself. So there's a lot that is gained by thinking about the amount of effort that it takes to build a contract portfolio. We use the phrase contract portfolio to represent all of the assets that we've chosen to build inside of the organization that are able to do work. Every time I can create a contract that is able to do work in the future, it's almost like I've made a robot to some degree. I could have done a single RFP for a catering service, or I could have done a master contract for catering services that can do work for me in the future. So, I mean, the global trend I'm talking about there is really thinking about the contract portfolio and how across all the assets, the cooperative contracts, the ability to emulate cooperative contracts, the ability to do small competitions inside of co-op contracts, which we call a bake-off, versus always doing everything one RFP at a time. And if we are going to do RFPs, can we create an asset out of it? Can we create a long-term piece of intellectual property that can continue to do work? So I think really having a strong contract portfolio is an incredibly important trend. In terms of ways to go to market, a couple of things I'm interested in right now. I really like the competitive proof of concept style that Michigan started doing, and I haven't seen it get picked up as much as I think it should, but I think there's a ton of opportunity with that, especially in IT sourcing events. So a competitive proof of concept basically says that we're doing a standard RFP, but in the middle of this RFP where we otherwise would be in a cone of silence and we can't talk and interact with people, we'll actually be able to use the software or the thing or the service for a period of time, and that it's built into the actual sourcing event. Because one of the biggest problems with sourcing events is that I was going to date myself by referencing Maxwell Smart, which, by the way, I never actually saw that show. I'm aware of the existence of that show, but the cone of silence they used to drop, right? Like we're in this cone of silence and we're not talking to each other. This perception that we can't learn anything through the sourcing event, I think is inaccurate, and it loses a lot of time. So being able to do things like the challenge solicitations, the competitive proof of concepts, the bake-offs to accelerate time, I think is a very important trend. And then, the automation side, I think is still a trend. I think it's been largely solved, but then how are we using that to be able to build dashboards and understanding of where we are and where the projects are? If you go into any procurement shop that isn't well automated and you ask them, what's the number one thing that's clogging up your work? A lot of times it's the end user calling in saying, where's my stuff? So the where's my stuff phone calls, and really thinking about procurement automation, not just from the perspective of, can I post my bids, but am I able to tell people where their stuff is and where it is in the process so that everyone is a partner and involved? I think that's the next level that's coming on a lot of the procurement automation, is to really focus on that customer interaction set.
What about AI? What are you seeing and how are you seeing AI being used in the procurement space?
I think the number one thing with AI is understanding that it has built up a lot of intellect and a lot of access to knowledge, but the human being is still the one that drives with wisdom. So AI is intellect, the human is wisdom. And there was a story that I read in the Harvard Business Review that I mentioned in a speech that I have about why you're doing AI wrong, basically was the story. And it's because we try to treat AI like all the rest of the technology applications, to where it's going to sit and do a static thing. And if we just teach it the rules, it'll do the static thing in a fully automated way. And eventually, maybe that's where AI comes. And there's a lot of really impressive things that it can do by itself. But I find it's most important to think about AI as a teammate, not a tool, because AI, at least the generative AI, as it relates to 95% of what procurement would care about AI for, is about iterating with a person to guide it and direct it. I've spent a lot of time learning how to drive the prompts and make the output work, but it is excellent at situations where you have a static knowledge base where you need to put forward unstructured queries and get unstructured response back. So I have a procurement manual. I need to be able to do inquiries against the procurement manual. I have 5 or 6 RFPs. I need to be able to query for commonalities and differences. I need to be able to say, compare these RFPs to an evaluation matrix and give me where to find all the things in the evaluation matrix and the responses. So a structured set of data led through an unstructured set of questions for an unstructured set of outcomes produced iteratively with the human being and AI. So I strongly believe that procurement needs to have a safe sandbox in which they are able to work that answers the questions about security and FOIA and traceability, and that we really teach people how to lean in and use these tools at the very minimum, because they'll have to judge those tools in the future when they're doing sourcing events. So I definitely think AI has been under tapped inside of government, and there is an exciting opportunity to be able to use it and to expect AI literacy. And the last point on that, I read an article on LinkedIn last week where they were talking about how this one particular business is now setting the expectation that it's not just that you're aware of AI, that you actually are developing a literacy in it, and that they're asking questions about why are we not using this as a part of the tool beforehand? And that's going to be a sea change for people if they have avoided making use of the tool.
Yeah, a big shift that we're seeing, I think, in the workforce and what is expected. Well, no surprising, right? Procurement's evolving constantly. So if we look back on your work and the changes that procurement's gone through and that you've gone through in your career, what has surprised you the most about working in procurement and the changes that you've seen?
Well, when I was a deputy CIO, if I would happen to accidentally walk into a room where they were reviewing an RFP, I would do one of the Grandpa Simpson turns arounds where I would walk in, I would see it, and I would immediately turn around and walk and leave the room, because I didn't want any part of that, because procurement was slow and architected and very challenging to complete. And that still is true, of course, but there's so many ways to be able, if you come with that mindset that we're there to find business partners who can be aligned with our goals and to really think about the way of going to market, not just from my perspective of the issuer, without any regard for who I'm issuing to and how they feel about it. But if I'm thinking as I come in, how do I get to an outcome that moves me down the road as quickly as possible? So, one of the trends I've seen is a move away from the ponderous 800-page RFPs that are incredibly difficult to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't still see those, but there's lots of ways to come at that. So here's one example. In a procurement automation solicitation that we're helping with, we're expressly saying, out of all the things I want you to know that you do, I'm going to say there's 80% of these that are baseline, which I'm going to put those in an appendix, and I'm going to assume you do them. And you, in fact, need to tell me that if you don't do them. But my assumption is you do them. So you don't need to write yes, 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 yes 800 times. Instead, I'm going to say, here's the 20% of this that are the differentiating requirements, right? So we all do catalogs, but we do catalogs a different way, for example. So that's a differentiating requirement. So just by saying all of those things over there, we're going to agree before we sign this contract that you actually can do them. But I'm going to make the decision on the 20%. And we're going to get into it. We're going to move on into the event. Demos, not memos, is the phrase from Colorado IT folks. Mm-hmm. So that concept of we all know these things, we all know who the players are, let's move on into the activity. I think that's been a thing. I think that's where we see some of the challenge solicitations, and the rest is to really regard the business partner who is on the other side of having to receive and consume this transaction and the hundreds of hours, as you know, that it takes to respond to these things if they're poorly executed. And I believe there's been a change on that. And I think that's very impactful, and it adds agility, and it adds the ability for the vendor to be an equal partner in the conversation. If when we do sourcing events, we write those 800 requirements, those 1,000 requirements, we better be at the same level as the market, right? If we're saying these are the 1,000 things and we're wrong, and we put 3 things in there as mandatories that the vendor community knows cannot be done, well, what does that affect? It affects how many people respond to our solicitation, right? So we have to have the humility to know when we are at the same level as the market, and when maybe we don't know as much as the market, but we know the problem that we're trying to solve, and therefore adjust our tools and our methods of interacting with the market in order to be a good business partner. So I guess if there's any one thing that I have seen and that I hope to contribute to, it's good sourcing events that don't waste people's time and that maximize the ability for the vendor to be the expert in how they come to the conversation. Because you're doing program type solicitations, right? Are you able to employ any of those kind of concepts and stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, I completely agree. And realizing you guys have this perspective, I've always said we have a unique perspective because we respond, right, to procurements. And then we also help our clients write procurements, obviously not the same ones. But because we understand the pain of responding to them, I think we also uniquely can kind of help our clients in a different way, right? Because we're like, okay, yes, you could ask them to do that in their response, but that means that it's going to take them another 2 weeks to respond to you, which means it's not going to be as quick. And it's probably going to cost them about this to do that, which means the little players that you're trying to get, involved are probably not going to bid on it because they can't afford it because they don't have large procurement shops. And so I think it is pieces like that we're able to see like from both sides that has given us a lot of insight. I think what's been most surprising for me is 10, 15 years ago when we would try to push on the innovation and just try to do, even trying to get some of our clients then to move from paper to electronic submissions was painful. But now it's not as painful. There are a lot of states, right? Like you mentioned, Colorado is another one that we work with and seen them change a lot and add in the ITN process and just a lot of different innovative ways to go quicker and easier and less of an impact and to really get a lot more competition than I think they were getting before.
And hopefully better outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Another thing that we've done and that I think is very impactful is we include a role and responsibility chart that we call a RASCI, which is one party is always responsible and what's the role of the other party.
Yeah.
And being able to articulate, how do we think this works? You saw this as a pattern in data center solicitations. This was something that was, back 15, 20 years ago, TPI and that kind of group was doing that. But we've brought that forward because I think it's very important for the buyer to say, here's how I picture things working. If you, as the person who's going to be my service provider, have a different opinion about how these things work, the best time to say that is before we enter into a contract event.
Yeah.
So, how often is it that we don't do a good job of describing the anticipated roles and responsibilities, and then we argue about it later that results in a change order? So I would personally rather see less requirements in some of the sourcing events and more of a focus on the problem statement and the clarity on the anticipated roles and responsibilities. It'll get us to a similar place, but I think it does it with more of a robust structure that will survive bumps in the process.
And I think you get a lot more innovation and you get best of class responses rather than here's exactly what I articulated. So that's the only thing I'm going to give you. And you're not getting any value adds unless you're actually doing a procurement that's focused on outcomes only. And I think it's a great way to do it. The other thing that we've seen on those large system projects that can be complicated is, as you said, not always the expert in that is usually the vendor, not the agency. And so we've actually been pushing them to do RFIs with the draft procurement and actually releasing that ahead of time so that we can address a lot of the questions and issues. And if there was a mistake, like, what is it? Let's fix it now. Or they're able to flag, right? The vendors can flag, hey, that what you asked for here is something that no one provides. So you might want to make that optional. And I think we've had a lot of success with that so that when you actually get to the sourcing event, it goes quicker and easier. And there's not as many questions and not as many amendments.
So, I've seen that happen before. I'm not sure if we've done that, but I certainly advocate for it. I think I saw Michigan do that on something I was dealing with on them a few years ago, where they literally attach the RFP as a component of the RFI. And again, this concept that procurement has to be drop the cone of silence, no interaction, no market research. I am the expert and I'm telling the vendors how everything's going to work. It can be rough.
Yeah.
And if you give me the opportunity as an expert in the space to be able to say, based on what you're getting ready to do, if you say this and this and this, it's going to have a major impact on cost, or it's going to have a major impact on risk. Because I have a speech I've done, I haven't done it in a while, but I still have it in the pocket, called 5 Things I Wish I Knew, which is sort of a game show style speech where I say, what are the 5 things that buyers wish vendors understood, and what are the 5 things that vendors wish buyers would understand? So, my final kind of coup de grace on that is saying that vendors will assess your sourcing event against risk and cost, which are both similar things, right? But if you present abnormal risk and you don't understand it, or you present abnormal cost, it will directly affect your outcome. And indulge me for 1 second in one of my personal pet peeves. When agencies will request a certain level of financials with no commitment to protect the financials. Well, first of all, who on the agency side is qualified to review my financials? I mean, that's a legitimate question.
And why? Why do you need
it? Who's qualified to judge them?
Yeah.
Right. And what are you going to learn from it that you can't learn in other ways? So I'll play out the story. You put out a response. You make 12 companies who respond, submit their financials to you. Well, for privates, those are very private. Like, I don't want people pulling my financials, like, just because they wanted to. Mm-hmm. So only 3 vendors made it to down select, and then only 1 vendor got selected. So those 9 poor companies that submitted financials, which probably weren't even going to be read anyways, now have their information sitting forever in somebody's file to come be FOIA'd, right? Yep. You could accomplish the exact same thing by saying the anticipated awardee may be required to demonstrate financial stability prior to final award. Boom, done, solved. 1-sentence solution. But yet we don't think that way. Or, well, that's been in the template for 15 years, so let's just do that. Or my risk officer, wherever that person is, has said, well, I need that, right? So now there's a disconnect in the chain. But if we said, what's going to get us to the outcome and what is honorable and respectful of our vendor partners, that to me is one of my biggest pet peeves, because I find it to generally be completely unnecessary for the work, and it directly affects the response.
I am exactly with you on that same pet peeve. Actually, it's one of my least favorite asks. I hate it when they ask that. We have the one that, asks for the salary of everyone, or the salary of your top executives, or, or the Duns and Bradstreet report. I mean, just crazy stuff that, again, who's looking at it? Are they qualified to look at it? Why do they need it? And is there another way to get to that that's not then available for public consumption?
Right. So I think, coming out of the nerd hole there for a second, it's that statement of, are we sourcing in a way that is going to generate a robust competitive response?
Yeah.
Are we writing these things to allow for large entities and small entities who maybe are innovative to come to the table to have an opportunity? And if I need to manage risk, can I do it with the anticipated awardee? Those are very thoughtful, strategic words that need to come out of the mouths of procurement officers when they're dealing with stuff that is complicated. Yeah. And the statement, I need audited financials. Well, small firms don't generally audit their financials compared to big firms. No. So the sentence is inherently a big business sentence, right? So really being able to think through, what I'm presenting, how is it going to generate the response and the opportunity to open up new ideas and to ultimately have enough respondents to have a competitive outcome so that I protect my business unit owner. If there's any one thing I hope to be able to influence through the course of my career, it's getting to that thought mentality.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also increasing competition too, right? Which is actually another procurement trend that I should have mentioned earlier, but looking at how we are bringing more equality to that competition and getting more, minority owners and small business owners to the table, or locals, Like that is an important piece of it. And if you are creating a solicitation that is only aimed at big companies, that's all you're going to get. And then they're going to be frustrated at the end.
That is absolutely true.
All right. Well, before we conclude, this is fun. I could probably talk to you about all these pet peeves for a long time, but I will save our listeners. I'd love to get your insights or advice for leadership and kind of leading change. So thinking about leaders and procurement professionals that are navigating the complexities and change in our world, what's your advice for them as they take that on?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of shifting things that are happening in government these days, a lot of motion, a lot of things that are being recontemplated. And so sometimes it can be hard to find your feet in where things are. And I believe that one of the most important responsibilities of procurement is to ensure the public trust, because that's the most valuable way that procurement is able to make people have the ability to come to some form of confidence that government can deliver on its promises and its missions. And so being able to hold fast to, I, through my actions, am able to reinstill confidence that government is meeting its expectations. So I think that is very important to find that as a point of stability, as far as a point of change. A lot of where I think this concept of efficiency and motion is about the fact that if we do the old school 80-page RFP for every single problem, then the amount of time that it takes to do sourcing can become so long that people want to break that first principle, which is that procurement drives confidence in the integrity of government, with a statement of, well, it's too slow and it's not business friendly. So being able to say, first of all, I must, through my actions, help contribute positively to the culture. And I need to be able to be introspective as to whether my choices have made things appear so bureaucratic and so slow that we're going to lose the first principle in order to gain the second principle. I don't think that you have to break everything in order to go fast. I think there's a lot of options to go fast. There's also a lot of times that you do need to go slow. And so really, if I'm saying I'm a procurement professional and I'm looking at everything that's happening, how do I drive change? I would look and say, do I have a contract portfolio that does work for me? Have I even understood that as a concept, that my contract portfolio does work for me? Have I set up contracts to allow them to do work for me? Master contracts, multiple awards, etc. And then, am I spending time on things that someone else has already solved? And if so, why? Why would I go and do a bid event for fence parts if I already have a state contract for fence parts that is perhaps 1 cent higher than what I might get on my own hand? But what's the cost of the time it takes me to get that 1 cent? Is it worth it? Right? Understand the economy of my motion to get work done. So being efficient with the contract portfolio and then bringing new concepts that say, I can go fast, or I can interact with the business community in a way that these outcomes don't have to take quarters and quarters and quarters, but that I'm being seen as an agent of program delivery, of an agent of change. And that, I think, is where procurement has to come out of the clerking characteristics of purchasing and into the strategic management of the spend in a way where they are going to be valued within their agency and their leadership infrastructure as we're building that kind of momentum.
I think if we could see procurement shops moving in that direction over the next few years, I think it would be transformational for how government agencies procure. So it gets me excited.
Well, it's that compliant and thing, right? Like
Yeah, you can do both.
if people have been in a role where they weren't given enough strategic opportunity, I've been in procurement shops where procurement never initiates the sourcing event. Every sourcing event comes from the agency.
Yeah.
And then if you say, well, procurement should initiate a sourcing event, right? Procurement is seeing the patterns, and procurement says, I need a master contract here. Just because an agency hasn't requested it doesn't mean that I can't see the need for it and I can't take the action. So I think that bringing procurement into this role where we're saying, I can help you be nimble, but I can also help make sure that we're holding that public trust. I mean, one of my oldest cliches in this business is, why do we have brakes in cars? So there you go. I'll ask you, why do we have brakes in cars, Stacey?
to keep yourself from crashing and to stop at the lights. Yeah. Slow you
We
down
have brakes in cars so that we can go fast.
and slow down.
It's not so that we can stop. Stopping, we only need to stop if we're going fast, right?
Yeah.
So we have brakes in cars so that we can go fast.
Yeah.
And we have controls in government because we need to not break stuff, but we can do the controls while we're going fast. But if we get in this mindset that everything has to be as slow as possible because now that people are looking at me, I'm really worried about it. And so therefore I'm going to go 3 times as slow. It's like, well, maybe the reason they're looking at you is because they think things are going too slow. So how can you, as the holder of confidence and the holder of trust, create a method that says, I can hold that trust and I can go fast? And if you're not the person who says it, somebody else will come in and say it who doesn't understand the characteristics of why we needed to protect that public trust. So I think that's a core responsibility of procurement is get and stay agile and maintain that public trust.
So important. I had a client tell me once, why would I ever procure a new IT system, even though it's 10, 20, 30 years old? Because it'll take me 18 months to procure it. And then it'll take me 2 years to do the design and build of it. And so by the time I get to the end, I'm probably 4 years down the road, and the requirements that I went into the project needing have completely changed, and the technology has completely changed because the world around us and technology moves at a much faster pace, that I've now built something that I no longer need. And it's so true, right? Like if the process is taking so long that what you need at the end is not what you need at the beginning, something's broken. And we got to figure out a better, more agile way and a faster way of getting to the result. So.
And interestingly, in that scenario that you gave, Stacey, then buying the thing that is agile requires more strategic planning and thinking about, well, how do I manage that situation?
Yeah.
Right? Because allowing somebody to do an agile deployment, for example, does keep the project associated with the currency, but it also creates an opportunity for that project to just run off the rails in a time and materials way. So different solutions require different thinking about, okay, well, now if my method of control isn't this hardcore waterfall 800-page requirement document that I can check off boxes on and do I have it, regardless of whether I need it anymore, then procurement professionals have to learn a new set of skills, right? How do I manage an agile contract? What are my methods of control in there? Do I have a definition of done? How do I drive that outcome? So again, procurement professionals learning and thinking forward into it. And then from the business unit side, being able to trust that they can say, here's what I need. Tell me how I get it and how I can enter into contract relationships with vendors that will be aligned with my desired outcomes and that I can manage if something goes wrong. And that's, I think, the best skill set for procurement professionals is to be able to be that strategic advisor on the nature of entering into business relationships with vendors.
Yeah, I think we vastly underestimate how much of procurement is actually contract management. And how do you make sure that you get what you need and that if things go wrong, you can bring it back?
Procurement builds the steering wheel in the car that you use to drive in the contract management phase. So if we don't consider the contract management characteristics and how is this going to play out, how do I keep that vendor incented? If you're not building that steering wheel in the procurement event, you can't retroactively drop it in the contract management phase. So even if procurement is not necessarily the day-to-day contract manager, it is through the procurement event that all of your ability to manage the contract downstream lies.
Well, Dustin, this has been really great. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your insights. For any listeners that want to learn more about what we've been talking about, want to learn about NASPO PASS or procurement and how civic initiatives and public knowledge can support you through that contract, you can go to our website at pubno.com or give us a call or reach out. Any final thoughts, Dustin? Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we sign off today?
Well, just again, thank you, Stacey. And I'm so glad that we have all gotten to meet each other. And I appreciate the welcoming nature of your team.
Same. It's been a pleasure to get to know you all. All right. Well, thanks again. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.